Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Homage to the Blessed One, the spiritually perfect One, the harmoniously awakened One. Today, the topic that I am going to speak about is Nirvana. Nirvana is the Sanskrit word. The Pali word is Nibbana. Now this concept, Nirvana, is a concept that has been discussed by many Buddhists as well as non-Buddhists, and people have been confused about this term, and it has become a term that cannot be explained. Some people say it can never be put into words. But what I would say is that it has been fully explained by the Buddha, and it is possible to put it into words and explain. The word Nirvana, as I understand, has two parts, Nir and Vana. Nir means none, the prefix none, and Vana, it means motion. Vana, like another word that comes close to it is Vayo. Vana is motion. And in other words, Nirvana is the state of mind that is not disturbed by anything. Is the perfect imperturbability of mind. That's how Nirvana is, as I understand it. Now, when we speak about Nirvana, there are three aspects of Nirvana. One is what I would call the cognitive aspect of Nirvana. Then there is also what I would call the affective aspect of Nirvana. And the other is the active aspect of Nirvana. Now, before we can go into a detailed discussion of that, we should first understand what is called samsara, because Nirvana is related to samsara. When the Buddha spoke about Nirvana, it was a way of getting out of samsara. Samsara is the cycle of rebirth, which means that people are born, and every time they are born, they die, and every time they die, they are reborn. And it becomes a perpetual cycle. This means we have been living many lives in the past, innumerable lives in the past. And we'll be living innumerable lives in the future unless this process is stopped. And why do we want to stop this process is important to understand. This process of continuation of a life in the form of rebirths is not seen as a pleasant thing in the teaching of the Buddha, because where we are reborn is not just in the human world. We are not always reborn as human beings. Rebirth takes place in different environments or different worlds. A person can be reborn in heaven, a person can be reborn in hell, or in the preta worlds, which are some spirit worlds, some good, some bad. And it is also possible to be reborn as an animal or even as a human being. But the problem is that where we are going to be reborn depends on what is called karma. Karma refers to our emotional state. This is the important thing. This is why the Buddha said, Chetana aham bhikkhave kammam. Chetana, the word Chetana refers to the emotional state. So it's the kind of emotion that we live with. It is our mood that we maintain in life. If we maintain a good mood throughout life, at the moment of death, we'll die with a good mood and we'll be reborn in a good situation. If we have a bad mood, if we cultivate a bad mood, like constantly worrying or constantly getting angry over things or constantly being greedy for things, that kind of mood will result in a bad mood at the moment of death, and that will lead to a bad rebirth. This is why the Buddha once took some sand into his nails and asked the disciples, which is greater, the sand in my nails or the sand in this earth? The disciples said, compared to the sand on the earth, the sand in your nails is very little. And then he said, out of the human beings who are reborn, those who are reborn in good places will be like the sand in my nails. And those who are born in bad places will be like the sand on this earth. What this means is that most of the time we are born in bad places, because most of the time we live with bad moods. We become emotionally excited and we are carried away by the emotions. So this is why there is always bad rebirth. But on the other hand, if by any chance we are able to purify our mind through meditation and other good ways of living, if you purify our mind and as a result we are born in a good situation, we may be born in the heavens, then what happens is, still heaven is not seen as a permanent place in Buddhism. Heaven is also impermanent, and there is death in heaven. And once a person dies, he can go down again and be reborn in bad places. So, even simply purifying the mind and going to heaven is not the solution to the problem that the Buddha pointed out. This is why the only way out is to attain Nirvana, which is to stop this process of rebirth. This is the important thing. And the other point is that even if we are going to attain Nirvana, if we are interested in attaining Nirvana, we cannot attain Nirvana till we have purified the mind. And to purify the mind is not only to have good thoughts in the mind, it is also to be free of an illusion that we have. That illusion is that we are existing. That is the illusion. That we believe that we are existing as a self. And as long as we think in terms of a self, and that we think as I or me or mine, to be thinking in that way is to be unable to attain Nirvana. So we have to start thinking in a different way. And what is this new way of thinking? This new way of thinking is very important to understand. We have to understand three things about life, three realities of life. The three realities of life are, in Pali we have the words anicca, dukkha and anatta. Now anicca I translate not as impermanence but as instability. Instability. This is a very important term to understand. The first thing to understand is that there are no entities in the world. Now this is something that today modern science has understood. And that is that there are only activities in the world, not entities. Originally people thought, even the scientists thought, that everything is made of atoms, and that atoms cannot be destroyed. But as time went, as science progressed, they began to discover that even the atoms are made of particles. And now people have realized that even the particles can be in the form of waves rather than real particles. So, in other words, everything becomes an activity. Even the particles are active. So, when we in Buddhism speak of existence, we are not talking about a static entity, an entity that is not moving. We are talking about the continuity of an activity, like a flame. When we look at the flame, it might look like something that is existing as an entity. But in actual fact, a flame is an activity that is going on. And the continuity of the flame is simply the continuity of an activity. And this activity is present there depending on certain conditions. When one of the conditions disappear, the activity stops. And then you cannot ask, where did this flame go? Because the flame is not an entity that goes someplace. It is simply an activity that stopped. So in a similar way, when we think of a person or an individual, that individual, when we speak of the individual, we are mainly talking about the body and the mind. What we call the body is also an activity. And that activity is going on all the time. So as long as we are supposed to be living, that activity is going on. So when we speak of death, we are only speaking about the stopping of that activity. And when we speak about the mind is also not an entity, it is just an activity. So in other words, when we speak of a person being reborn and continuing in the next life, we are really speaking about the continuity of an activity, not the permanence of an entity. So this is why when we speak about permanence, we assume that it is a static entity that continues. But when we speak about instability, we are speaking about an activity which is not stable but unstable. It is like a piece of ice that when the temperature changes, it ceases to be a piece of ice, it becomes water. And even water, when the temperature becomes high, the water becomes water vapor and it becomes invisible. So like that, everything in the world is unstable. That is the meaning of anicca. But this instability is producing unhappiness. We don't like to see things being unstable. We don't like our life to be unstable. But what we see is that a person who is born begins to grow old, then falls sick and die. That is the instability of life. Now, that instability of life is unpleasant. It doesn't make us happy. But why is this unhappiness? The real cause of the unhappiness is not the instability. The real cause of the unhappiness is our desire for stability. And this desire for stability is a blind desire that is not aware of the realities of life. It is not aware that life is an unstable process of activity. We think in terms of entities, and we want the entity to remain. So this is why it is only by giving up or getting rid of this blind emotion that the unhappiness ceases. So the second fact about life is this unhappiness that is produced. And if everything is unstable and producing unhappiness, it is not as we want. If it is not as we want, and we cannot do anything about it, that means it is not under our power. If it is not under our power, it cannot be called mine. So whenever we speak of possession, we speak of having control over that, what we possess. If we possess something like a house or car or anything, we can do whatever we like with it. That means we can sell it if we want, we can break it if we want, we can do anything. But the thing is, if we have no power over it, then that means it doesn't really belong to us. So in the same way, this body begins to grow old, we can't stop it. The body falls sick, we can't stop it. The body dies, we can't stop it. That means we have no power over the body. We may be able to move about, move our limbs, and that kind of control which is just a limited thing. But if the body falls sick, we can't even move. If the limb becomes paralyzed, we can't move. So in other words, we don't have real control over even the body. And so is our mind. What we call the mind is also not fully under control. Because if we think, I will stop thinking, I can't do it. And all kinds of thoughts come into our mind, even without our knowledge. So things like that point to the fact that we don't really own anything in the world. We don't possess anything in the world. And if we don't possess the body or the mind, there is nothing to call myself or me. So if we can understand these three facts of life, the instability, the suffering that is created by this, and the impersonality or the non-possessibility of things, then the thought I am disappears. And when the thought I am disappears, all our desires and hatreds and fears and worries have no foundation. And what happens is the mind calms down. The mind is actually not a thing but an activity. And that activity is really the reaction of an organism to stimulation. This is the important thing to understand. When we speak about the mind, it is a reaction of the organism to stimulation. And then this reaction can come as an emotional reaction which becomes the motive for action. If we are angry, the anger will lead to an action, which is to fight or quarrel or to kill or something like that. And also, if it is a desire, like a sexual desire or something like that, then that passion, the lust, will also lead to an action to obtain what we desire. If it is a fear, again that emotion will lead to action which is to run away from what we fear. So like that, our emotions lead to action, but if we can maintain a state of calm, tranquil mind, then all those emotional actions will stop. So the important thing in Buddhism is to stop this reaction, which is the cause of all unhappiness. So in modern stress management techniques also we speak about this. So the real meaning of the word nirvana, therefore, is to make the mind tranquil, to stop reacting. And if we want to act, it would be what I would call a response rather than a reaction, which is an action without emotion. It's a calm, tranquil state of mind which leads to a rational action. So nirvana, although it is very often spoken of as something that cannot be fully explained, could be explained. And there are these three aspects. The cognitive aspect, which is understanding that there is no self here, and the affective aspect, which is the calmness, the tranquility of the mind, and the active aspect is the action which is not emotional, but it is a response, a calm, deliberate, thought out, rational action. So this is the meaning of nirvana. Thank you.